All right, I guess I'll just give you a little rundown of why Wild Ones is Wild Ones Wilderness. Wild Ones Wilderness, we're a group of professional guides and certified outdoor educators, and we wanted to find a way to give back to the community. So we came up with 56 hikes in the Greater Toronto area that you can go on, and each one of them offers something different. And we offer these our open hikes, open to the public, and we do these every other Saturday. And the money that we generate from these open hikes and the money that is graciously donated by you guys actually is used to take Toronto's homeless, disenfranchised, and newcomers out on free canoe, camping, and hiking trips throughout the year. You guys, today we just had our AGM on Monday, and now you guys are now 1,000 plus people that we've taken out in the past 3 years. There was a hurricane that came through here in 54. You can read this if you want, or you can just listen to me talk about it. There was a hurricane that came through here in 54, and it ended up washing through this area, and it wiped out a bunch of homes and things like that, and wiped out bridges, wiped out a bunch of stuff. And if you take a look over here, you'll see a watermark on the side of the bridge. That's how high the water level was during Hurricane Hastings. So just to give you an idea, it's pretty high up. It basically came as a 21-meter high water cascade down this river. So when it came, people had no idea that it was coming, had no idea that it was going to hit, and it ended up hitting around 2 o'clock in the morning. People were still in bed and everything else, and when it ended up hitting, it swept entire homes, farms, everything out. In fact, if you go and read some of the old Toronto stories, people were talking about in the newspaper how they could hear houses floating down the river or people screaming inside the houses because they were trapped inside the house and the house was literally getting washed down the river. So you can see over there, that's the high water mark, which means basically all of this, including us, would have been very much underwater at the time. But it's because of that and things like that that the TRCA moved in, and they ended up taking over all the floodplains in the area, and they bought up all that land and they turned it into parkland. So every once in a while, if you're walking down and around this area, you can see old foundations and stuff like that, and you're like, wow, I wonder what was here at one time. It was probably a house, or it was probably a farm, or something like that, and it just all got washed away with Hurricane Hazel. And Hurricane Hazel is what they call like a 50-year storm, and as you can see, we're well past the 50-year mark, which means that we've got another major storm that's coming like that. We just don't know when it's going to hit. So
climate change.
Yes, yes. So something to be aware of, and it's because of the TRCA and because of Hurricane Hazel actually that we get to have all this free roaming around room that we do and all this green space in the city is because of that. The more you come out on the hikes, the more you can learn about. You come out, especially during different seasons and stuff like that. We're coming now near the end of the grow season here, so we will be pointing out quite a bit of stuff along the way. But keep in mind that pretty much any time of the year you can find medicine in the outdoors. You can find food in the outdoors if you know what you're looking for. It's there. One thing I will tell you is that we have a couple of plants that are here in Toronto that I want you guys to stay like. Please try not to touch too much of the foliage and stuff like that unless you ask us about it, because there's stinging nettle, which gives a minor irritation. There's poison ivy and poison oak, which also give you a minor irritation. And then there's giant hogweed and giant cow parsnip, and those will literally burn you like an acid burn if you touch them.
It's a 3-degree temp.
Yes. So that's why we ask that you guys don't just grab it every day. And just ask about it, and chances are if it's a wild edible or it's a medicinal, we know what it is. If it's just a plant, we're not botanists. We know basically what you can use to survive with. So if we see a pretty plant, it's just a pretty plant.
So yeah, it's a biennial plant, which means in its first generation, the first year it grows, it's usually very low to the ground. So, with most biennial plants. So this is first generation burdock, still edible, but not the leaves. With any burdock, the only part that is edible that you're going to use is the bulb, which is basically the root. It's kind of like a woody, fibrous potato with too much starch. And for that reason, we suggest that when you're preparing it, you do what we call a double wash, is you boil it in water and then boil it again in fresh water from that. So it takes out a lot of the starch. I mean, it's not going to hurt you to ingest that much starch, but it might give you a stomach ache. And especially in survival situations, anything that makes you disgruntled it's going to make you not want to survive longer. So yeah, it's a double wash. So this is first generation here. It has these very broad leaves, and when the bugs don't get to them, they actually have another purpose, which is you can use them to other things that you forage. It makes a really good basket for about a day. Now, because it's a biennial plant, this is, as Terry was saying, the second generation. Biennial plants typically grow out their first year and then sprout their second year in seed, make more food. And we've actually seen these almost 18 feet tall on certain trails, especially on the birds. And once again, I personally wouldn't call a second year generation unless I'm already reseeded, like I'm doing right now. And same thing, it's a very large bulb. The bigger the plant, the bigger the bulb. Sometimes they can be almost the size of bowling balls.
This is giant cow parsnip right here, and you'll see these clusters on the top. These clusters, if it's cow parsnip, they're usually white, and if they're yellow, it's usually giant hogweed. So, but they look very much like this. They have large clusters of flowers like this. They have very broad leaves, and what happens is if you rub up against this plant, or you touch this plant, and you walk out into the sunlight, it's got an oil on it that's UV reactive. And once it hits the sunlight, you could walk right past it and it could be like a cloudy day and not really feel anything. But as soon as you get into sunlight, it's UV reactive. And what happens is that oil that comes off the plant actually turns into like an acid, and it'll burn your skin, burn you really, really bad. In fact, to the point where people have to put down dogs and stuff like that get run into them. So.
And people have had to get skin grafts.
Yes.
It's like a third-degree chemical burn.
Really, really bad stuff. But this guy, fortunately, they only have a very short season. They only last for about 2 months. And once this is dried up, once it's all dry and everything else, you can grab it, you can touch it, you can move it out of your garden so that it ends up showing up at your house. Wait until it's dry, and then, like when it's already brown and everything else, then remove it. It's only when it's green that you can get that oil off of it. So.
And as you can see, it's still green, and you can still see a shimmer of the oil on the plant.
Yeah.
And that stuff is very dangerous.
Yes.
And the spiders.
Yeah. Well, the spiders like it because these are big flower clusters, and it attracts butterflies. No, it doesn't bother the spiders at all. Yeah, but it'll attract lots of different other insects that need the nectar from the flowers. So that's why the spiders set up in there, so they can wait for the other insects to come along. It's kind of like a drive-through for them.
And certain arachnids have a certain thickness of exoskeleton that allows them to deal with that.
So if ever you rub against it, what should you do?
You should try and wash it off immediately.
I would suggest Dawn soap.
Is that way deep up there?
Yeah, or any very strong detergent in general.
Yeah.
And do it in darkness.
Yeah. But the thing about it is that when people get this on their skin, usually the burn is very quick, happens very quickly. So by the time that even if you got it under your skin and you realized that it was starting to burn you and you drove to the hospital, by the time that you got to the hospital, even if it's only 2 blocks away, the damage is already done. What happens is it burns into your skin. Once it starts burning, it's no longer on your skin, it's in your skin now, and it's burning a hole through you. So when you go to the hospital, they basically shave off that blister. If it sounds incredibly painful, that's because it is. They shave off that blister, and they wrap you up, and you start all over again. Some people actually have to get skin grafts for it and stuff like that. So once again, really deadly stuff. And that's why we say don't just go up and touch things, because you never know what you're touching. So.
Can I share a story?
Yeah.
I know a guy, a farmer, he actually got in contact with that on his skin. He waited 3 days before going to the hospital because they could start to see his bone. His skin was gone.
It's
also tough fellow though.
If you are going to Google it, it's not for the faint-hearted or weak-stomached.
Yeah.
It
is really deadly.
Messy pictures.
It's bad. Just don't. Honestly. No fun.
This is called a seasonal wetland, and as you can see back here, seasonal wetland means that for certain parts out of the year it ends up flooding out. In this seasonal wetland, you'll find all kinds of things. You'll find frogs, you'll find turtles, you'll find all kinds of stuff like that. And this will actually dry right up by the end of fall. This will pretty much be dried right up. And the frogs and turtles and stuff like that that are living in there now actually burrow into the mud, and they wait for the season to come back around in the spring for the water to come back in, and they basically hibernate that entire time. And they wait for the water to come back in, and then they pop back up out of the mud and everything else. So it seems weird that it seems like they disappeared and everything else, but they didn't. They actually burrowed into the mud, and that's where they hibernated over the winter. While we're in this area, we can look around and you can see that there's tons and tons of maple in this area. Tons of maple, right? Maple all over the place. Well, the unfortunate thing about that is that most of these are Manitoba maples. And anybody have a guess on where Manitoba maples come from? Manitoba! Yes, give this man a prize. Yes, so Manitoba maples, the problem with Manitoba maples is even though they're indigenous to Canada, they're not supposed to be in this area. In Manitoba, the grow season is only about a month in Manitoba, and here the grow season is about 6 months. So what happens is these trees grow so fast that they don't spread out their roots enough, and the trees end up falling over. When the trees fall over, they sprout right back up again. You'll see trees that are like totally on their side and are still growing straight up. The big problem with the Manitoba maple is because it's supposed to have a month grow season and not a 6-month grow season. These trees grow really, really fast, and then they topple over, which causes serious concern for people that are out hiking or anything like that. Serious concerns for the city too, because they take down power lines within about 10 years. They grow from like basically just a seed to a full-grown tree in 10 years and take out a power line. So the Manitoba maples that you see in here, even though it seems nice because they are maple trees and everything else, and they're supposed to be here, these ones unfortunately are not supposed to be here. And the city spends a fortune trying to wipe these out every year, and they keep coming back. And the problem with them is that they grow so fast that they block out all the sun space for the other trees that are supposed to be growing in this area. So there's lots of different problems with the Manitoba maple that we have here. So, what did you want to talk about?
Just an interesting point on the Manitoba maple. Well, everyone knows this iconic leaf. This is not a Manitoba maple. This is actually a swamp maple. Because we're in seasonal wetland, also known as silver maple. This is actually
It's nothing at all like a maple.
also the reason because it's part of the Acer family started to get wet. It produces the same. I'm sure you've all seen the little keys.
Maple keys and
Maple keys,
the trees that
which
kind
are
of like
edible, by the
helicopters,
way.
they spin down to the
You take the wing off and you take a little seed inside, and that's actually edible. It's a really nice trail snack, personally.
What's with the dog there? All right, now normally we can cut across this way, but as you can see, because of the rain that we've had the past little while, we can't get across there, so we're gonna have to backtrack a little bit. But while we're here, why don't you tell them a little bit about the cattail?
Well, kind of looking for a good example.
If you stood in there, we wouldn't be able to see you. Just blend right in. These people have been hanging out here.
Yes.
Yeah, cattail.
So this is the cattail. This plant is actually known as the supermarket of the wilderness because no matter what time of year it is, there's something edible on it. This point right here, as you can see, it's really dried out, but in the early spring when it's fresh and green, it's edible. Have you ever like sliced cucumber into slits and just chewed on that? It's kind of like that. At this time of year, another survival technique is you see this fluff here? Not only is this excellent tinder for starting a fire, but if you're freezing to death, you can actually collect a bunch of this and stuff it in your clothing as an insulation. So it's really handy for winter survival. Now in the early spring, down right by where it comes out of the ground, that is almost just like a snap of celery, just a little bit more chewy. And in the winter, what you can eat off it is, much like the burdock, is the bulb underneath the tuber. And another cool thing about cattail is this actually detoxifies areas like this. It absorbs all the toxins and flushes them out, and it's still safe to eat, but it also helps clean up water systems, and that's why friends of the Humber actually come in here and try to take out its enemy, Phragmite, which fortunately I'm not seeing too much. So it's a very handy plant. Keeps you warm, keeps you fed, keeps your water clean, and obviously where you're going to find it is in wetlands like this, low-lying wetlands. And yeah, if you ever see it, don't cull it.
And how do you get to the root in the winter? You just dig it up?
Just dig it up, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Shovel
you
can't pull
I'd
it.
suggest
No, you
using
gotta
a
go
hatchet.
underground.
You'll be there all day.
Right.
Yeah, I would suggest using like a hatchet or something.
Yeah,
Heavyweight
okay.
blade.
Got it.
And right over here, right beside the cattail, we have peppermint. Right here. Everybody here has at least probably tried peppermint gum at one time or another. This is peppermint. This is what that spice is. And because this is from the spice family, there's a rule about the spice family. Just about everything from the spice family comes with a square stalk. As you can see, this one's very square. Comes with a square stalk. And
Is this wild peppermint?
yeah. You might be able to smell a little bit of it to take it with. It's a little late in the season for it, but
Crush it up a little bit, it might be a little bit more punchy.
But yeah, that's peppermint there. And the thing about most spices is that they grow along the water's edge, and you'll always know that it's a spice because of the square stem on them. So there's more right here. Yeah.
It's late in the season.
Yeah, it's late in the season. Yeah. When you crush it up.
Sorry, Terry, what is this?
Fingers a little bit.
Garlic mustard.
Garlic mustard, okay.
It smells
How's it
just like
taste?
gum.
Like garlic
Yes.
mustard.
Yeah.
It's
Now,
too tough now.
How's it
Spring
taste,
gets
sir?
better.
Now, myself, I absolutely love garlic, but I can't
March
eat it
and
because I
April.
have an ulcer, and it upsets my ulcer. But I can supplement this garlic mustard with it all the time, so that's what I actually do. I use it for seasoning on pretty much everything. You can throw it in a salad to spruce up your salad a little bit. Yeah, and the great thing about garlic mustard is for a wild edible, you can actually find garlic mustard all year round. It's actually got an anti-freezing agent inside of the fluid, inside of the plant, and the plant will actually stay green, just like this. You can dig down in the snow, and you'll find it underneath the snow, and it's still bright green and everything else.
haven't
You can dig
tasted
down, pluck it up, and that's
I might
garlic
taste it,
mustard.
I
there.
don't
Izzy, can we eat
The
it?
deers absolutely love it. So if you're into hunting or anything like that, you find a big patch of garlic mustard, deer absolutely love it. Find a good spot, buy that big patch of garlic mustard and sit and wait. Guarantee you'll get a couple of bucks going through there in no time. So, yeah. Well, that's the garlic mustard, and It grows pretty much everywhere, and it's an invasive. It shouldn't be here. So if you see it and you happen to like it, pick as much as you want. You don't have to feel bad about it. Clean an entire area out if that's what you want to do. You don't have to feel bad about it. It's really bad invasive. It'll take over your garden. If you try to put it in your garden, it'll take over your garden in like 0 time.
Can you grow it indoors?
You probably could grow it indoors. I've never tried it. I just know that if you pluck it, and you put it into like a paper lunch bag, and you leave it on top of your fridge for about 2 weeks or whatever, it'll dry out, and you can just take it and crush it up and throw it right into whatever else you want to cook with. So, yeah.
It smells exactly.
Also, on that note,
Smells
we're going to
really
be teaching you a lot about different insects
Smells
you can
good.
eat, different plants you can eat. There's a very big difference between edible and palatable. So this is one that actually tastes good.
Yes. Yeah.
Most stuff is
Just tastes green. It's like
just tastes
lettuce.
green, and then
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
stuff like water lilies that I don't even know how moose eat it.
Yeah.
You got it. Don't worry, you got it. Careful, easy as she goes.
Yeah, because the shoes, my shoes are for the size. I mean, look at look at my shoes.
One quick step, there you go.
Oh, yeah. My shoes as well are absolutely muddied up.
You got it, I got you.
Oh my God, my shoes.
There's the reason we call ourselves wild ones.
Thing is, it gets worse too. The more people cross, more mud on the log.
Yeah, the lock sinks.
Okay, wait, hold it.
Whoa.
Two. Oh, you got a soaker. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
You guys may just want to jump
You were, maybe better there.
My shoe just came out. Oh well.
Shoe down.
Oh my god. That's okay, I got muddy feet. Wow, it really went down there. That sucks. That's okay. You good? I'm good. Good pictures down there. It's a color mainly.
Also, on that note,
Greek
don't
raw
eat
frogs usually
toads.
green.
Yeah.
You can eat frogs, not toads.
Yeah.
Is it true that if you lick them you get high or you get sick?
Depending on where you are.
What kind of toad it is? Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cartoon.
What kind of toad is it?
This is just your standard American toad. Yeah. And he's just a young guy. This guy will get about the size of my hand. Today, this is the only piece that's left of the original carrying trail. All the other parts of it have been used up in suburbs, have been put over top in schoolyards and everything
You're
else.
standing on.
Yes. But this trail, right here, this trail has been here for 16,000 years. And today, we're going to be walking that same trail that's been here for 16,000 years. While we're up here, please watch your step. It gets some pretty serious drops on either side, so watch your step going through. But
Don't want any incident reports.
yes, exactly. No selfies on the trail, please, because it's too steep and it's too dangerous, so we're not going to do that here. But we're going to take you up on this trail here. This goes up and along this ridge. And the unfortunate thing about this is that even though this trail has been here for 16,000 years, it's only about 350 meters of it left. All the rest of it's been closed off, or streets have been put over top of it, or whatever. So this is the last little piece of it. And who knows, maybe in our own lifetime, this will be gone too. And there'll be no permanent reminder of it.
There'll be more erosion.
That's very true. That might be one of them.
We were out here first thing in the morning. We were out scouting on this trail, and We ended up taking the binoculars and we looked and we couldn't tell what it was, but we could see a carcass out on the ice.
And there was a lot of blood.
Huge pool of blood around the carcass. And we ended up hiking down there and found out that it was a deer that got attacked by a pack of coyotes. And they were so efficient at cleaning off this deer that by the time that we found it, they probably got to this deer around 6 in the morning. We were down here about 8 o'clock in the morning. And they were so efficient, they had already cleaned it down to the bone. And when I put my hand on its head, the only spot that still had fur that was still intact, it was still warm. So they cleaned this thing down to the bone in like 2 hours.
Although I do have to
Yeah.
interject there,
Yeah.
because they left the tenderloin on the, like it's like the hind leg of the deer, and if anyone who has ever eaten game meat or hunted, that's the tastiest part of a white-tailed deer. And there was a couple bite marks in it. They ripped the skin, but they didn't really get into the meat, and I was actually almost tempted to take the meat. But I was like, oh, there's bite marks in it, I don't want to get rabies.
Yeah, so I've got a picture of it here on my phone. You guys want to take a look at it?
Is that the one? Oh my
Yeah. That's the deer there.
The deer couldn't have been
And yeah, they cleaned it right down to the bone in like 2 hours.
They're
So-
hungry.
So this is known as the staghorn sumac. It's quite easily identified. The reason they call it the stag sumac, or staghorn sumac, is because it has this furry likeness of a stag's horn. Like right here, it's very similar to a young male's horn. And it's also easily identifiable by this iconic red cone at the top. Now when harvesting this, you want to try to find, you want to avoid these black spots and find, like, see that like almost fire engine red? That's the part you want to use. And a lot of people just call them berries, even though they're not technically berries. And you want to make about the size of, I'm not going to do it right now, I'm going to use the black stuff. We're not making tea right now. About the size of a silver dollar. So about that. And you would throw it into a cup that's like that one on my pack. And you boil it up for about, I'd say about rolling boil for about 5 to 10 minutes until it turns pink. It's actually, as we were discussing earlier, palatable and edible. This actually has a quite pleasant flavor. It kind of tastes like lemonade. A lot of people actually call it sumac-ade for that reason. It's super high in vitamin C. It's super high in vitamin A and K. If you're nursing, pregnant, or have liver issues, you want to stay away from it. And even as a healthy individual, you'd only want to have up to 2 cups a day. Another cool thing about it, especially in winter survival, is when you drink it, it raises your heart rate and it warms you up. So what I like to do personally is, in winter survival, I'll make a cup of sumac, and it's pretty much, you can find it almost anywhere like throughout the year. In the wintertime, it might take a longer time to get the good berries, but it should still be around. Or you could do what me and Terry do and just collect it in spring and then dry it out and have it in your survival pack. So yeah, what I like to do is I like to make a cup of it in the morning, because when you wake up in minus 40-degree weather and all your hot rocks have gone cold, it warms you up. And then right before you go to sleep, it warms you up to kind of help you drift off to sleep in minus 40-degree weather. And yeah, so it's an excellent plant for any survival, and it's almost kind of like nature's neocitrin. Like if you got a cold or a flu or something like that, this will knock it out of the park.
It actually just tastes exactly like neocitrin.
Yeah,
It's
it
got
has a
that,
lemony
like,
flavor. That's why they call it
citrusy,
sumac.
lemony kind of taste.
Très mignon.
Beautiful.
Now the cool thing about birch, we're going to be standing here for a while because there's so many cool things about birch.
Where do you start?
Not only did the Aboriginals use it to make baskets to collect things, but they also used to make canoes out of it. Because, as you can tell from its fibrous texture, and I'd like to say it's almost like paper that's layered onto each other as a bark. But all the way to natives that had to deal with what's called a snowfield. And in those, you can deal with snow blindness. which is basically the sun that is reflecting in my eyes quite hardly right now. Could you imagine if we were in a large plane of snow? You can actually burn your retinas from the reflection off the snow. So what they used to do is take these, as you can notice, these little slits here. Mess that one up.
Which is the side of the snow.
But they used to make goggles. So they could see through and still not miss their step, but it was blocking out a lot of the UV radiation from the sun off the snow. On top of making canoes and baskets. In wilderness survival, one of the reasons that this is one of my favorite deciduous trees is because you notice it comes in layers. So if you are in the middle of a torrential downstorm and you need to make a fire, everything is wet. Where are you going to get your tinder? Well, luckily enough, birch bark is pretty much waterproof. So you take off that external layer and get into the middle of it, and you would have dry tinder, and it's one of the best tinders you can light up in a place. You can make baskets, you can... It's not the best wood to burn, but at the same time, don't burn down my birch trees.
One other thing that you can use the birch for is take your hand, rub your hand like this across the birch, you notice this chalky white stuff. You can actually use that as sunscreen. If you're out and you don't have any sunscreen, you just wipe the chalk off there, wipe it onto your face, and actually use it as a sunscreen. So,
All popwood trees actually make that.
yeah.
And in the spring, you can actually tap a birch tree. It's much like maple syrup, but less sugary, but it's way higher in vitamins and minerals. Because an interesting thing about the cedar tree is that's actually a natural insect repellent. So when you see like old depictions of the voyageurs and the old Native Americans, they always have this like branch of cedar in their hat or in their boot or something like that. That wasn't for show. That was because it actually, black flies, mosquitoes, deer flies, horse flies, etc. are repelled by it. So that's why I like to call it bushman's cologne. Just do a little dabby on the ears because we usually really like to get you because your blood capillaries are really close to the skin at that point. And now if you notice, the cedar tree has a very interesting leaf pattern. It's almost more like a scale. And if you wrap them on top of each other, it almost looks like a shingle on a roof. Well, guess why I'm talking about that? Because when you're building a debris shelter, it actually can help make your shelter not only rainproof, but like I said before, it's insect repellent. And another cool thing about the cedar is it's very fluffy. So the boughs of it are really good for bedding. So if you put about 2 feet of bedding on your debris shelter, not only is it once again insect repellent, but it also keeps you off the ground, which creates an R value, and that's how we distinguish insulation. So it keeps you off the ground, keeps you warm, keeps you away from the bugs, and it smells terrific. Like, I don't know if any of you guys smell this before.
Though I tried.
This one is a little bit domesticated, so if you crush it up,
Yeah, you can crush it up.
if you crush it up a little bit more,
Oh, now I can smell it more, but it's
I don't know
really
if you
not
want to pass
strong.
around.
Oh, it's okay. I can pass it around, sure.
And once again, this is my favorite coniferous tree because not only does it do all that to keep you away from the bugs, shelters you, keeps you from the cold, you can also make a tea out of it. And it's super high in vitamin C. And I'm going to tell you a little short synopsis of the story. When colonials came over, a lot of us were on extradition boats or on military boats, and rats would actually get into lemons and oranges, which was their main source of vitamin C. And unfortunately, if they ran out of vitamin C, they would go through what's called scurvy, and it's a really terrible affliction. like, it's a horrible way to go. Like, your extremities, like your earlobes, your nose, eyelids, lips just start falling off. It is horrible. And you get horribly sick because vitamin C is what we use to boost our immune system. So it's a really, really terrible affliction. So a lot of these extradition boats and military boats, when we first hit the shores of North America, the natives realized what they were dealing with. And they didn't know that the cedar tree had vitamin C in it. So the natives just made them a tea and was like, here you go, but not in the same language. And probably not the best idea on their part, considering what happened after. But yeah, cedar, one of my favorites. Yeah. It's amazing. And also you can like take some of this, crush it up, put it in a pot of water, put it in your house, and it will make your house smell amazing.
How many days or weeks do you go without vitamin C before scurvy sets in?
It's usually about 2.5 months.
Oh, 2.5 months. That's short. Oh.
Well, you got to remember to get
Yeah, it took 4 months
to get across
sea voyage.
the pond, as they put it. To get across the pond, as they put it, at that time would take anywhere from 6 to 8 months.
Go ahead. All right, so what we have here and right here is willow. This is weeping willow, by the way.
There are many different genus of the willow. Weeping willow is probably the most common in this region. And the cool thing about willow is what you want to do to harvest it is always find the newest growth. So you want to take all these leaves off. And also as an identifier, these kind of sharp, almost arrowhead-like leaves is the way to identify it. Also, especially the weeping willow, it's pretty iconic with the way that it weeps. But what you want to do is once you strip the leaves, you want to grab this new growth and you want to take these stems, break them up, and actually if you want to pass that around so people can identify it better. Much like the staghorn sumac and a lot of different teas that I mentioned earlier, cedar and all that, you want to take one of these tiny cups, and you take about, depending on the amount of pain, you take about that and boil it. And it contains a chemical, and it's kind of a tongue twister, so it's called acetylsalicylic acid, also known as ASA. It's the active ingredient in aspirin. And before we learned to chemically synthesize it, we actually used to take it from the willow tree. So this would probably be the amount of, like, I'd say a baby aspirin. And so anything you'd use an aspirin for, cramps, fatigue, blood pressure, all kinds of different stuff that you would take an aspirin for, you can just find in the wilderness. The strongest source of it, we're not seeing any right now, but would actually be the juvenile willow, which is actually bright red and grows on riverbanks. And willows in general like wetlands. So we're coming down here, there's water source over there, so that's why there's a willow there. And yeah, it's always the newest and the youngest growth that you can get is what you want to utilize. And it's very simple. You just boil it for about 5-10 minutes. And you make a tea. Hell, you could throw some sumac in there, a little bit of mullein, depending on what you're dealing with. And it doesn't have much of a flavor. It's kind of woody. It doesn't, it's not pleasant, but it's medicine.